Hi, my name is Terry Westwell and welcome back to Panic at the Book Club. This week we'll be discussing The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharpe. Now, if you do want to suggest any books, don't forget to subscribe and comment down below. If you haven't read this book yet, just a word of warning, there will be spoilers, so I suggest you go do that and then come back to the video. So The Girl I've Been is a young adult novel about a girl called Nora, who's the daughter of a con artist who finds herself in the middle of a bank heist. Growing up, Nora had to become all these different girls in order to help her mum con bad men out of money. Until one day, a Mac becomes much more than just a con to her mum and actually falls in love with him. Now, unfortunately, Nora's new stepfather was very dangerous, very abusive, and had a more than sketchy business. Now, during this time, Nora's name was actually Ashley, and with the help of her estranged sister and the FBI, she actually manages to help find enough evidence and gather enough evidence to put both her mum and her new toxic stepfather away. However, Ashley's stepfather is a very dangerous man with a lot of power, and so she had to go into hiding and become a new girl, Nora. And Nora has managed to build a new life for herself, with her sister, a new best friend who knows everything, and even a girlfriend. Until one day, she has managed to find herself in the middle of a bank robbery, and in order to survive, she has to spill all of her secrets. Now, with a price on her head, she's actually a lot more valuable, alive and delivered to a revenge-seeking stepfather. The book focuses on surviving and escaping the bank robbery, but throughout you get glimpses of Nora's past and all of the different many girls that she has been throughout her life. I really like how each chapter that focused on the bank scenes started with a list of items that they'd managed to acquire, as well as what stage they were at within the actual plans to escape. I think the book was actually really well paced, and I really enjoyed how the location was so limited. The majority of the time the scene was just the bank, until you managed to get a bit more in-depth information about her childhood. Now, reading the book, it was very clear that it was in fact a young adult book, but it was a young adult book centered around children that had to grow up too soon, and I think that was really well represented in the writing of the book itself. I think it really reflected that they weren't just normal young adults. They were, they'd been through shit. It addressed a lot of issues and even brought awareness to things such as endometriosis, which I think even now a lot of people aren't really aware of. It also went through a lot of different forms of abuse, and how things like that can really affect you later on in life, whether or not it's going through acceptance or accepting that, it isn't your fault. I think it was a really beautiful bit of writing that really focused on the similarities that these people had and the healing, that the different stages of healing that they were all going through. I think moving on to the characters, Nora, or also known as Rebecca, Samantha, Haley, Katie, and Ashley. I think her character was actually really well written. I think it was really interesting to read about how Nora grew up and all the different girls that she had to become in order to support and help her mum with this con life. I like how it showed with each girl how the abuse that she had to endure changed and how it kind of developed as she got older, and how she started to realise that what she was going through, what was happening to her, wasn't normal and wasn't right. And I think that form of acceptance is really difficult for a lot of people who are going through abuse. I think that element of it was really realistic, that sometimes it's not always so black and white and you realise straight away what is happening to you, especially if it's something that has affected you throughout your whole life. I think it was actually really important to see how even 5 years after she's free, she's still learning to understand how it wasn't her fault and she wasn't to blame for things. You know, how it was her mum's fault and she should stop putting herself down for the things that her mum put her through. You know, the things that she had to do and the way that she had to adapt in order to survive didn't make her a bad person, didn't make her strange, it didn't make her anything, it just made her a survivor. So the three main characters within this book all had to endure some form of abuse, all enjoyed some form of abuse within their childhood or lives that they were struggling with, and they were struggling to not move on from but heal from. And I think it was really important to reflect how each of the characters dealt with certain situations, such as just supporting a friend when they're down. Nora's initial instinct was to tell a friend to, push it down and ignore the feelings, and you could see how that instinct, how she got that instinct and where she got that instinct from, and it might not necessarily be the instinct of one of the other characters. So Wes is Nora's best friend, who was also going through a really difficult childhood. He also was abused growing up, but this time it was by his father. And I think it was really a really important representation, of him having that fear and not being able to get out of that situation. And I think it really addressed some misguided beliefs that it is something that only happens to girls and it is something that only happens to women, because it's not. And I think we are all aware of that, and I think that's something that really should be addressed in such a good way like this. Nora's feelings towards Wes's mum was really well written. She had this resentment over his mum because he was in that situation and she was protective over his friend and felt that she had to put him first because nobody else would. And I think it was really important because she could also acknowledge with conflicting feelings that she was a victim too. I think the depth and feeling of the emotion in that scene was a really nice recognition, and you can understand where she's coming from. Oh, I forgot to apply my setting spray. So moving on to Iris, I think her story was really important in the topic of, abuse awareness, because from the snippets of information that you get, it might seem that her story isn't quite as extreme as what the other two characters went through. It discusses how she still, she still instinctively defends, her abuser, and how she's on a different stage of acceptance within her life. And I think Nora recognises that within Iris and just tries to remind her how it wasn't her fault, and that no matter how much she wants to downplay it, it was abuse and it wasn't right, and she was, her and her mum were right to get away from that. Had some issues with the young, naive, expectant element of these characters. One moment they are young children who have had to grow up too quickly, and the next moment they are angry at Nora for not spilling all her secrets, for not telling them about her whole childhood. And she was in a situation where she had to hide away from her stepfather. She had to create a new life and hide away because he was after her, and he did have men trying to find her. And I think, especially if it's a life or death situation, I don't think you need to spill your guts. I just think after a few months of dating, you're under no obligation to spill everything about your life. I'm not saying that she shouldn't have told him eventually, but surely she would be putting them in danger, and surely them going through similar issues themselves, not to the same extreme, but them going through similar issues themselves, you think that they would understand that instinct to not immediately tell people about their abusive upbringing, especially because they were holding secrets about their childhood themselves. Like, I do understand why Wes might have been a bit annoyed, because their relationship, it was spanned over a few years, but by this point with Iris, they'd only been together for a few months, and I think it would be, considering that she had no idea about Iris's family, I think it was really unfair to hold anything then against Nora. But in all honesty, out of the whole book, I think that was pretty much my only gripe about it. I really did thoroughly enjoy the rest of this book. It was a story with mystery and the constant threat of immediate danger, and I think it really draws in the reader. It wasn't a thriller book about a teenager's life, it was so much more than that. It wasn't focused on the romance between characters, it wasn't focused on some other drama that is in a teenager's life. It was, it was about healing, and it was about escaping bad situations. It wasn't a thriller book about the life of a con artist, so if that is the book that you're looking for, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed. It was a super unrealistic book, but with such realistic and raw issues of trauma and surviving abuse, and how family doesn't always have to be the one that you're born in. Sometimes you choose your own family. Although most of the topic of conversation was about a very extreme form of abuse, it touched on so many different types of physical and a mental, emotional abuse, and surviving abuse afterwards, and the process of that, and how that process isn't the same for everyone. So overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I think it's definitely one that I would recommend to friends. But let me know what you think. Did you enjoy it? So next week we'll be reading Blood Orange by Harriet Tyce. So please make sure that you get your comments down below by the 22nd at the latest, so that you can become a part of the discussion. The week after that, we'll be reading Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll, and that will be discussed on the 29th of May. So for those of you who may need a little bit longer in reading one of these books, just to let you know, going forward, I will be listing the next 4 books and the discussion dates down below. So on that note, thank you very much for joining this week's discussion, and I'll see you all next week. Bye. If you have ever struggled, please know that you are not alone. And if you are going through an abusive situation, please know that it is not your fault, no matter what anyone says. So please find help. Ask a colleague, ask a friend, or call a hotline.